See through the surface round about, the noise, the rush, the fear, the doubt. Though modern Britain lies without, fair Logres lives within.
Welcome to Classical Etc. You're in the studio with Memoria Press.
Welcome to Classical Etc. I am Paul Schaefer, and I'm here with Martin Cothran, Tanya Charlton, and our special guest, Malcolm Guite. Now, Malcolm's here for our Memoria National Conference, and he is the winner of the Parnassus Prize this year for his book, Galahad and the Grail. Now, in the conversation I had with Malcolm last night, I think I walked away thinking this man is Anglican priest and poet, and your life's work has really been bringing those two things together.
Yeah.
Am I right on that?
Yes, I think that's true. I mean, they're twin vocations, if you like. I mean, I experienced the vocation to poetry first and to priesthood. And there was a period where I thought they were pulling against each other. And I wondered, if I took time for poetry, I wrote a sneaky sonnet on a Sunday afternoon, I was kind of robbing Peter to pay Paul. But academically, I was beginning to realize we really needed to make the case for a recovery of a baptized imagination as at least potentially a truth-bearing faculty, and for poetry as a way of knowing. I was learning that particularly from Coleridge. And of course, in the end, the blindingly obvious, I should have seen it, but I realized that I had this great exemplar in George Herbert. And the more deeply I looked at George Herbert's holding together of priesthood and poetry and those twin vocations, and the more I saw, if you like, the sacerdotal nature of his poetry, and actually the poetic nature of the way he handled his vocation of priesthood, I realized effectively, for me at least, as for him, these are kind of two sides of the same coin.
And I think that leads us into really the conversation we're going to have about Galahad and the Grail. But I don't think this would be Classical Etc. if we don't actually talk about first what we're reading. And I know, Malcolm, you were already accosted at our conference to be asked what you were reading.
Yeah.
So, would you mind sharing that with our listeners?
Right. Gosh. Well, I have to say, I've just been on holiday, which is lovely. Holiday reading always involves some classic detective fiction for me.
Yes.
I'm a great Dorothy Sayers person, so I'll reread any of the Lord Peter's endlessly.
Me too.
Though in fact, what I picked up just on a second-hand bookstall to take away with me on holiday was an old paperback of The Sign of Four. So I was back into kind of Conan Doyle. On a more sort of serious level, I love literary biography. Though literary biographies never tell me what I really want to know, which is exactly when these people wrote and under what circumstances,
right.
What kind of pen, and I want the juicy details about writing. I'm not particularly interested in the juicy details about their complicated love lives. I want to know what happened in the writing hut, But there are some very good literature, and I think, Richard Holmes, although I came to have differences and, push back when I wrote my own big book on Coleridge, I know, and he's written a good 2-volume. He's nevertheless a very fine writer, and he's turned his attention most recently to Tennyson, and he's just written a book called The Boundless Deep about the young Tennyson, and particularly his engagement with science and the three-way conversation that's going on in Tennyson's heart and mind between faith, science, and poetry. So I devoured that. I was also reading a life of Edward Fitzgerald, the translator of the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, which had a massive, 19th century literary influence. And he's a friend of, it's extraordinary. I like writing about these great Victorians. I like reading about these great Victorians rather, because it was an extraordinary moment in society. So in that, there's a period where you basically have Carlyle, Dickens, Thackeray, Tennyson, and Fitzgerald all in and out of each other's houses and writing to each other. And of all of them, Fitzgerald's the least well known, but the greatest letter writer. And so you get a huge amount about their life in his letters. But I grew up with the Rubaiyat in the sense that my mother just knew it and quoted it endlessly. If ever anything was going wrong. You know, my mother would say, love, couldst thou and I with fate conspire to grasp this sorry scheme of things entire? Would we not shatter it to bits and then remold it closer to the heart's desire? You know, and you just had that stuff, and you know, people don't read it as much as they did, and obviously at the time, I mean, you know, it bombed us. I mean, he did this thing. He learned Persian. He loved it. He wrote this thing, and it was just remaindered, you know. And I think it was one of the pre-Raphaelites. Dante Gabriel Rossetti, I think, who found it in a sort of used bookstall and took it to Ruskin, and they all went, "Oh my goodness," you know, and then it became a thing, you know.
Yeah. They had remainders back then, I did.
Yeah.
Martin, what are you reading?
Well, Malcolm mentioned classic detective fiction, and of course, as an American, I'm thinking Raymond Chandler. Yeah.
No.
I'm in the middle of Farewell, My Lovely.
Right.
But I'll say, as I did for a session we did here earlier this week, I just finished Dominion by Tom Holland.
That's great.
You like that?
I think that's a really, certainly in England, I think that's a book that's genuinely nudged the culture.
Well, I wondered.
I think a lot of people are, you know, it's given a lot of confidence to some sort of Christians in the public square, but it's also made a lot of people who assumed that they were dyed-in-the-wool completely secularist to realize where some of their best ideas came from.
Oh, right.
Right.
Because he's sort of telling a chronological story in a way of the history of Christianity, but he's at all times pulling in from other eras. I mean, and he's talking about everything from the Crusades to the Beatles.
Yeah, no, he's extraordinary. I mean, he's got an extraordinary range of reference. But he himself has, I think, been very much on a journey, you know.
I've heard that. Yeah, I've heard it. And so I finished it. You know, I was expecting it to be a history book, and it is. But I got done with it, and I thought, this is a great book of Christian apologetics.
It is, essentially, yeah. And it's apologetics in the best sense that it's one of the things it's doing is removing obstacles to faith.
Yeah,
for people.
Exactly.
It's kind of clearing the ground. It's not by any stretch of the imagination a proselytizing book, but it nevertheless says something of absolutely central significance happened in the Christ event, which has changed everything forever. And that's, and he's not writing that as a personal conviction, just saying, as a historian, look what happens.
Right.
Because it's truth.
Yeah, exactly.
And then I'm reading a book on the influence of Robinson Crusoe.
Oh, right.
Is that the name of it?
No, that's not. And I'm trying to remember the name of it. But just how much that book worked its way into, and it was really kind of, I don't know if you call it the first, not a novel really, but just extremely influential in how it influenced other literature and later on English literature. So it's very good.
Tanya?
Well, I needed something light this week, and a podcast listener recommended, because she knew I was a big Agatha Christie fan, so she recommended a book that Agatha Christie wrote, not as Agatha Christie, but under a pseudonym. I can't remember the pseudonym now, but apparently she wrote 6 narrative stories that are not detective fiction. And this one is about this woman that is she's stuck in the desert going between Baghdad and London in the 30s. And she's she's read all the books she's got. She's all alone except for the people that own the little rest home she's in. And she doesn't have anything to do. And so she is contemplating her life for days. Like that's all she's got is her mind. And she's realizing some really, I think, huge mistakes that she's made. And she was one of these people that, had the perfect life, built the perfect life for herself. And she's starting to actually realize by just being still all of the things that were not perfect in her life.
Well, your life's a story, and it's easier to see it as a story the closer to the end you get, I think.
Yeah, well... Yeah. Yes, her children are grown. She's probably in her 40s. But Agatha Christie is I just like her prose. I like, as soon as I started, I think, I feel at home with her writing.
Well, I am on a very different track than all of you all. Last night, I was recommended to read Death of a Pig by E.B. White.
I think
And you did have your pig tie on.
Yeah, I had my pig tie on, so it brought up the conversation. It's a 4-page essay that I read. I went home last night, and as I'm laying in bed, I started reading this, finished it this morning, and it's just delightful.
All right.
It's, but it's also, it's the struggle of a farmer who is trying to raise an animal to eat it. Yeah. And he talks about, like, I'm raising it to murder it. But then when it gets sick and all of the effort he puts into trying to save this animal.
Yeah.
And his writing was very, very good.
Well, it's impressive even in Charlotte's Web. I mean,
Lee loves E.B. White's essays.
Yeah.
I didn't know those essays existed. I only knew about Charlotte's
There's a
Web.
book of
He was
essays.
a writer for the New Yorker, I think.
Oh, really?
This was published in the Atlantic, but I think.
I've become a sort of savor of what used to be called in England the familiar essay, the essay that's speaking to you. Because I've ended up having to write lots more. I write a weekly column for the Church Times on the back page called Poet's Corner, which is just very short, 500 to 600 words reflections. But I've been doing it for about 6 years, so I have to keep saying, have I said this before? But it's trebled my appreciation of G.K. Chesterton, because G.K. Chesterton had 2 or 3 of these things going on at the same time.
Yes, but he needed an editor.
Fresh in all of them. But then you realize, you go back, there's, the romantic essay, there's Hazlitt, and De Quincey and Charles Lamb. And then, of course, the kind of granddaddies of them all. So behind them is Johnson in The Rambler, and then Addison and Steele in The Spectator. And there's this tradition of the reflective essay. And, so I mean, obviously, when you mention all those names, my little scribbles for the Church Times. But if I need inspiration, I just need to go back. What can be done in a short essay? I go back to those great masters.
Yeah, Chesterton. I did a Master of Arts degree in monograph on Chesterton, and I collected him for many years. And there's so many of those little old cloth-bound volumes of collections of essays.
Minerva editions.
Yeah.
The Tremendous Trifles, I think, is
my that's good. That's a good one. Mm-hmm.
And of course, Belloc was great.
Yeah, great essayist.
There's a collection of Belloc's called On Nothing and Kindred Subjects.
I don't have that one.
That's brilliant. Yeah.
Well, and just the humor that comes. I mean, a lot of those great essayists are also very humorous. Yeah. Well, let's talk about what you've written, Malcolm. And I think first we should probably start off with your goal of the project, right? This is an Arthurian project.
Yeah.
This is only one. Galahad and the Grail is only one of multiple volumes.
Yeah. It will be eventually, God willing and the people consenting, it will be 4 volumes. Though that's simply the physical volumes as they come out. Each volume, it comprises of 3 books. So it's a 12 book. I mean, that's deliberate. That's looking back to Milton and Paradise Lost and what would the Fairy Queen, had Spencer lived to finish it, would have been 12 books. So in a sense, there's a pull of the cap to my epic predecessors there. And it is in that sense an epic, though it's also probably best understood as a kind of ballad cycle. I mean, I think and obviously my great predecessor in terms of doing a long Arthuriad is Tennyson. But in terms of the poetic form, I've wanted to do this. I mean, I actually first started writing poetry about Arthurian poetry when I was 17. In Spencerian stanzas. They're awful, but they're full of quoths and doths and prithies. I mean, it was no. But I wasn't very good at it. But I've wanted to do it. But so I always wanted to do this, but I was puzzled about the form. And the more I studied, as it were, particularly, the high modernists who have various oblique Arthurian references, I mean, and the great high modernist who does it with David Jones, the more kind of daunted I was, but also I was uneasy. I was uneasy about the whole high modernist thing, the whole Joycean Eliot Beckett project, which seemed to me to be actually refusing meaning to your readers rather than offering it. It seemed to me there was something
it's somewhat typical of
cliquish,
modernism.
something coterie, something, so I wanted, Shakespeare and Dickens and Tennyson as forebears, in the sense that they're writing something profound and well worth reading, but they're lucid, they're attractive, and they're genuinely popular. And I didn't know the form. And then I was just staring him in the face. So this was so important, I kept not doing it. This is too important to do.
Yes.
I can't start. So one of the things I did while not doing this was to write a big study of Coleridge, and specifically of the Rime of the Ancient Mariner. My book Mariner that came out in 2017. And at that point, it dawned on me, and I was praising Coleridge in this book for having taken the ballad form, a folk form, a common form, a naturally oral form, a form which is given to storytelling. But until Wordsworth and Coleridge took it up, people thought it was, a bit crude. And Coleridge, particularly in the Mariner, turned it into this extraordinarily delicate literary instrument. He could the variations he plays on the form, the different ways he uses it. So I suddenly thought, staring me in the face.
Right.
So the form owes a lot to the Rime of the Ancient Mariner. But the other great user of that form and varier of it is, of course, Chesterton's Ballad of the White Horse, which was the last go, I think. That came out in 1911. And again, that was very popular, and it really conveyed a sense of Englishness to people. It was as close as we were getting. I mean, Tolkien rightly says that, in a sense, his Legendarium was intended to be a kind of an English epic. But I thought it was time to do it again. And this is, if you like, British rather than simply English, because it's Wales
now,
and Cornwall.
If there's
and
a
Scotland.
listener who is not real familiar with poetry, and particularly poetic form, how would you describe the ballad form?
So the ballad form is, at its simplest, is it's a 4-line verse form, and it alternates 4 stress and 3 stress lines. So it is an ancient mariner, he stoppeth one of 3, by thy long grey beard and glittering eye, now wherefore stops thou me? It's Coleridge. And then it'll have lots of instances. So again, Coleridge, the fair breeze blew, the white foam flew, the furrow followed free. We were the first that ever burst into that silent sea. So that's where it is. But you can't, if you're writing a long thing, you need to vary it in different ways. So one of the things that Coleridge does is occasionally extend. So normally ballads, which makes them easy to write, they rhyme A, B, C, B. So it's the second and fourth that rhyme. But one of the things you can do, and I do in this, is to take that unrhymed, if you like, that orphan C line. You're waiting for the punch of the line, the B sound to come back in, but you delay it. And you do a little run on C's. And that's something Coleridge does occasionally, but Chesterton does a lot. Chesterton does it a lot. So maybe the simplest thing would be to just read you a bit of the prelude to this, which introduces you both to what I'm trying to achieve and why I'm doing it, but also to the form. So this is simply called Take Up the Tale. One of the other things that ballads do is they, rather like blues, they have, or like Homer for that matter, where you have, it's always the rosy-fingered dawn, or, or the wine dark sea. So there are certain set phrases in ballad form that everybody uses. And many, many, many English and Scottish ballads begin with the line, as I walked out one morning. What I walked on a May morning. So that's where this starts to signify the thing it's part of. As I walked out one morning, all in the soft, fine rain, it seemed as though a silver veil was shining over hill and vale, as though some lovely, long-lost spell had made all new again. So that C rhyme, I've given it 3. So,
but in some cases, you've got.
Sometimes it's longer, yeah.
It's 5, 6, 7.
Yeah. Well, I love, it's partly, I feel like I'm making up for it. I lament the loss of rhyme and meter in English. The thing that made me want to be a poet was reading Keats. And what I could hear in Keats was the sheer delicious melody of the sound, and not just the rhymes, but the assonance. So, I mean, the line of Keats that suddenly thought, oh my goodness, what's that? Is in Ode to a Nightingale, when he starts with this very dour, nothing's happening here, my heart aches and a drowsy numbness pains my senses. But then he hears the nightingale and he says, "'Tis not through envy of thy happy lot, but being too happy in thine happiness," and here it comes, "that thou, light-winged dryad of the trees, in some melodious plot of beechen green and shadows numberless, singest of summer in full-throated ease." And like,
but you've done that.
Melodious plot of beechen. Where did that come from?
You've managed to do that.
So I'm trying to recover that sound, that lost sound. I want it to be musical.
It is melodic.
Yeah. Well,
I mean, we've all said we have to read it out loud. We find ourselves reading it
so
out
I put
loud.
a little note at the beginning, note from the poet. I say, this poem is written in the ringing, singing, rhythmic form of the English ballad. Ballads were made to be sung or chanted out loud long before they were ever written down. It's when read aloud that a ballad comes to life. So I suggest the best experience of this poem is to be had.
And I love the way you end it. Read each stave as though you were yourself telling the story around a campfire.
Yeah.
And above all, enjoy it.
Yeah.
Well, and when I read this, I started actually just reading it to myself, and then I went and got your audio version.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, I've recorded the whole thing.
Going back and forth actually was helpful, because I found myself not sitting around a campfire. I wish I was sitting around a campfire listening to it, because I could have focused fully on it.
Yeah.
But I was listening to it as maybe I was driving and things, and I was missing things. And I know that there's symbolism that I was getting when I read it that I wasn't getting as I listened to it, because I wasn't fully listening to it.
Yeah.
But fully listening to it was, or just listen to it at all, was actually more enjoyable than sitting down and reading it.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And when we talked in Lexington a few months back when you were at the Lewis House, I asked you, I said, why does this remind me of Chesterton? And you explained that Coleridge had those middle lines. Is there a word for those repeating middle lines? It used to but you said, well, Coleridge kind of increased the number of those, and then I think this is what you said. And then Chesterton sort of turbocharged.
Yeah, took it and ran with it. Yeah. But the thing about rhyme, I mean, a couple of things. First of all, I think that, as I say, I'm making up for lost time. I think English poets have stopped doing it. I mean, Chesterton's probably one of the last. And I think, it may sound slightly odd, but if I use the language of the muse, and if I have every artist loves their medium. In my case, it's the English language, and the English language herself is my muse. And in a kind of strange way, I feel like it gives her pleasure to be rhymed. Like that makes her purr.
What
That's
it's
what
meant
she
to
wants.
do.
Yes, but
she's waiting for this to happen, and she's saying, "Look, all these modern poets, they can't manage it." And I say, "See me tonight in my heart. Have I got rhymes for you? You're going to love this." But it's really, So, funnily enough, here we are in America. I would say Dylan is one of the great poets, and he's got a description of rhyme in Tambourine Man, which I think one of his most perfect pieces. And when he says, using exactly this, he says, "If you hear vague traces of skipping reels of rhyme to your tambourine in time, I wouldn't pay it any mind. It's just a ragged cloud behind. It's just a shadow you're seeing that he's chasing." And you go, what?
Okay.
And it's these vague traces. But why? Why is that important? Saying, he's like, "I wouldn't pay it any mind." I don't think so. This is really changing your mind. And I think it goes back to, one of the things that's right at the heart of this is the notion of re-enchantment, the notion that we're living in the imminent frame, we're living in a, disenchantment. Max Weber was the person who first used that to describe the kind of modern industrial world. Now, I think the word re-enchantment is problematic. I think it presupposes that the world is actually disenchanted and also has the presumption that we have the power to re-enchant it. I don't think that's the case. I think the world is still as enchanted as ever it was. I mean, what we have to do is not so much re-enchant the world as undisenchant ourselves.
Unveil it.
Yeah, unveil it. Lifting the veil is a really crucial image in this. Obviously, the whole poem, the climax of it is the lifting of the veil. And when the lifting of the veil over the chalice happens, the other veil is lifted. So that's a crucial thing. But to go back to this word enchantment, the point about the word enchantment is that it contains the word chant. That's the point. It just like incantation, is canto. I sing, I mean, let's go back to Virgil. Amorum verumque cano. There has to be a singing line and a chanting line to actually slightly change your mode of consciousness. The poetry itself, just by being poetry, lifts the veil a little. That's what Coleridge said. He said the purpose of poetry is to remove the film of familiarity, which our selfishness and solicitude has cast over the world. The world is as wondrous as it ever was,
Another big theme for Chesterton.
The world is charged with the grandeur of God, as Hopkins says,
Sorry.
Go ahead, Tanya.
I just can't imagine doing this. I can't imagine are you just like awake in the middle of the night thinking, what rhymes with this? Or how do I get this line?
Luckily, as I say, I've got a lot of poetry. I've got the rhythms, particularly these kinds of rhythms.
You know what you want it to be, but finding those words.
I mean, my mother would recite the Rhyme of the Ancient Mariner to me. I mean, when I was kind of semi-homeschooled, and I didn't get to an actual school with other kids until I was maybe 7 or 8, and I made a new friend, and I remember saying to him, you know that thing when your mum recites the Rhyme of the Ancient Mariner? Do you like that? I love that because, I know it's not going to be bedtime. Well, he's going what thing? I just thought that was a mama thing, That's what mothers do, So, no, how does it work? So a lot of it starts, that verse I read you as I walked out one morning and then I seemed to hear something. That literally, people think I'm being metaphorical there, but I'm not. A lot of my poetry starts, and my walks, I try to walk 3 times a day. My walks are the time for both poetry and prayer. So often the lines come to me, and it used to be, Tennyson could walk out and compose 50 lines and just come back and write them down.
Oh, man.
I can't do that. But I could retain, I could, back in the day when I was really working on sonnets, I could really probably compose a sonnet in my mind. But I get verses of this, and I either jot them down or now, if I have a phone, I'll just record it.
Oh,
and
right.
then, but it starts on the tongue and possibly scribble down. I do travel with a little notebook in a satchel, so I'll sit down on a bench on my walk and just write. But then I bring it back to my little writing hut or my study upstairs, depending on the weather. And, I'll sort of light up a pipe and I have a manuscript book. The whole of this, and indeed the one, has been written out originally with a fountain pen, on blank unlined paper. And often, at the beginning, when I was really working on getting the form right, I would just use the left-hand page for the first draft and leave the right-hand page for the extra lines and the crossings in. Now I'm confident enough to actually compose on both pages. But I've got space, therefore, to. So then eventually it gets transcribed, onto a computer. And even in the act of doing that, I'm revising it. But I can't do the final revisions on a screen. I just can't do it. I'm not a digital native. So after I've done, 20 or 30 stanzas, which I've then transcribed, I print it out.
Yes.
And I go back to the same little hut that I wrote it down with, and I make ink emendations. And often there's a word that's been waiting. And I've used a holder, a filler, that's not quite, no, that's not quite right. I know the word herself will come soon and tell me, write me. And
that's another question I have is it has to exactly that, which is that, you see poems sometimes and they're rhyming in some way. And you look at the word and you're thinking, that's not really exactly the right word in terms of its meaning. The poet put it there because it rhymed.
The rhyme, yeah.
But you read this book, and it not only rhymes, it's exactly the right word. How does somebody do that?
I mean, obviously, in one sense, I can answer by saying I've had a long apprenticeship. Like I started writing this, if you like, badly almost 50 years ago. Like I'm 68 now.
Plus you've read 17. A lot.
So I read a lot.
Which is important.
I've memorized a lot.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I didn't
clear.
even know what I've memorized. It's in there. But you kind of have to, I mean, when I was first, under the Keats influence, I was longing for those beautiful sounds, but I was also gushing a lot, and it was full of hyperbole, and as I say, it was kind of quoths and doths and prithys, and I mean, I spent earlier on, I mean, I was, obviously you start as a poet, you're a wannabe poet, you eventually have to figure out what this is, but I started off saying like, why was I not born in the 1790s? Like, how was I not a young companion of Keats and Shelley? And so I wrote as though I were.
Right.
I wrote and I just rejected the age I was in. And so I was just pretending to be that. When I learned useful stuff, I learned some chops, but at first I was like listening to Keats, as I say, I was like the kid at the back of an Eric Clapton concert playing air guitar. Like, I don't even know what this is, but I'm trying to move my fingers like that. And then later on, when I discovered the metaphysical poets and, Donne and Herbert in particular became really, again, I was going like, how come I wasn't one of them? And again, I was writing rather in their manner. And none of that poetry that I wrote there is publishable. It's derivative, it's imitative, but it's inauthentic in the sense that I'm not writing as a person now to people now. That doesn't mean I don't want to draw on the past. I absolutely want to. I mean, I think we've lost stuff we need to recover. But one of my collections of poetry is called, the second one of lyric poetry is called The Singing Bowl. And it opens with a poem called Singing Bowl, which is kind of the muse speaking to me. And it's the piece of advice I needed, when I was 16 and had to wait in my 50s to really understand. So that poem begins, begin the song exactly where you are. Remain within the world of which you're made. Call nothing common in the earth or air. Accept it all and let it be for good. Start with the very breath you breathe in now. This moment's pulse, this rhythm in your blood. So you have to be authentically in the world. It doesn't mean you're happy with the world you're in. It doesn't mean that you don't want changes and transformations and you don't want to call people to a kind of awakening to what they've lost. But you have to be where they are. So that same prelude is as I say, is set, in the present and the present task. So one of the things that influenced me very strongly in terms of certainly the way the Inklings Harry handled Arthuriana was at the end of that hideous strength. I mean, that hideous strength, there is still a Pendragon, ransom, and Merlin is revived. But towards the end, there's a conversation between two of the characters about what Lewis calls a good haunting. He says something we may call Britain has always been haunted by something we may call Logres. That was the Welsh name for the kingdom of Arthur. We've heard better than we can do, but we can't quite forget it. And we need to remember it every so often. So there's a bit where the muse is speaking to me and telling me, finally, Guite, you've left it incredibly late. You're in your 60s. You need to do this. But then how do I do it? And so it's all take up the tale, tell all this. There's a long list of what I need to write. And then it says, lift up your eyes to see the light on Glastonbury Tor, then come down from that far green hill to where the sacred waters spill and shine within the chalice well, and listen to their lore. And then this is the kind of key verse. Yea, listen well before you start. Be still ere you begin. See through the surface round about, the noise, the rush, the fear, the doubt. Though modern Britain lies without, fair Logres lives within. You may yet walk through Helen's Isle by oak and ash and thorn. The ancient hills do not forget, and you might wake their wisdom yet. Who knows what wonders might be met on this midsummer morn. So that's placing me, the poet, right here in the 21st century. but saying
with
this,
Logres in your heart.
Yeah, exactly.
Did your mother like the Arthurian legend?
Oh, totally. She
Yes.
told me these stories first. Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. And she told them. She was an amazingly. She's a very intelligent and very widely read woman. And
It sounds like it.
I realized afterwards when I came to university and picked up Mallory for the first time myself and began to read, in high Middle English, what Caxton had printed, that there were whole passages in there that my mother had been more or less quoting. I mean, she didn't give me a kind of sanitized version of it, So, I mean, the thing that was most memorable for me, I mean, I was her account of the Dolorous Stroke and the coming of the wasteland, which you often don't get told at all.
Right.
And it's the only thing that makes sense of the Grail. The Grail is to heal the king, and in healing the king, to heal the land.
Right.
And I remember being, shocked when she told me the story of how Balin rashly, even though the voices are telling him, come no further, man of blood, and he finds his way into the Holy of Holies, and he's in fear. He's being pursued by Peleus. He's looking for a weapon, and he sees the spear of Longinus hanging in the air above the Grail, and the drops of blood falling, and he's, oh, Mum, no, don't tell me what it is. And of course he rushes forward and seizes it, and at that moment, as he wounds the Fisher King, the whole land is laid waste. And I'm going, but Mum, he didn't know.
Right.
So I remember being really, so she was really full about the whole, when they lie 3 days and 3 nights, under with Balin and the king he's wounded, and the Grail itself and the spear, and then on the 3rd day, Merlin comes and moves the stones, and Merlin tells him that because he's done this is the dolorous blow, he's brought this wasteland about. I remember stopping Mum, I said, but Mum, that's how could there even be a world where one rash man does this thing? And what about all the people, she was telling me the crops died in the field and the fish floated up on the river, and the cows couldn't bear calves and people couldn't bear children, and it was completely. So how could there be a world where that could even happen? And at that point, I was about 8. This is 64, maybe 65, and my mother looks at me and says, "Well, I'm telling you this story, Malcolm, because you need to know you live in just such a perilous world."
Wow.
And this was just after the Cuban Missile Crisis and the fears of a nuclear winter, and so. Oh my goodness, but then she says, she said, I mean, it's amazing. It's just really strange if you're a kid and you think about your origins. And, she says, your father and I had to really talk and pray together and to think, is it right to bring children into such a world? And but we did so in hope. And then she goes back to the story and she says, after all these devastating things that Merlin tells Balin about what he's done, and that he's going to have to ride for 3 days and everybody's going to come to their doors and curse him because he did this. She says, but he did not ride on without hope because, and then she tells me this bit of the story, because Merlin said to him, one day the Grail Knight will come and he will undo what you've done. Where you came rashly and with a spirit of vengeance, he will come reverently into the chapel. Where you ignored the Grail, he will celebrate it for what it is. And then he will, with the very same spear with which you wounded the king and laid the land, he will take that, and because it is the blood of Christ on the spear, drops from the spear that wounded him will heal him. And when the Fisher King is healed, the land will be healed. So he knows that before he goes out. I mean, you can imagine, I'm 8. But obviously I didn't forget it. I'm telling you about it now. But one of the things I learned there was that this story knows things that I don't know. However long ago it was written, it already knows about what we were facing there. And later when I was looking at the ecological, at the wasteland, and then finally as an academic, when I was looking at the whole problem of disenchantment, the whole problem of this reductivism. I mean, Lewis was once asked, what's the sum of all your writing? He says it's against reductivism. That is a kind of wasteland that we've been living in, a moral and intellectual wasteland, and that again, that needs healing. And this story is about, but finally, of course, eventually I I returned to my Christian faith as a young man. I mean, having lost it for a while. When I came back to that, I became aware. I was reading, Milton, this time as a believer rather than merely as a student. And, you think Paradise Lost, it's a plot giveaway in the two. Yeah. But, you don't get to the moment of Eve reaching for the apple until book 9. But when she does, so saying you and Eve in evil hour with rash hand reached it, he doesn't say, like the first thing at that moment of the fall of mankind, he doesn't say, and so this individual woman committed a peccadillo and it'll be all right with therapy. I mean, what he actually, what he actually says, the very first thing he says is, earth felt the wound. And nature, sighing out through all her works, gave sign that all was lost. So I grasped that this isn't just a private story of humanity, this is a cosmic story. And of course, later on, I came to read Romans more seriously, and I realized, that the creation was subjected to futility, but in hope, and the whole creation waits with eager longing. And oh my God, this is the wasteland story. And of course, the professors, when I was studying this in the 70s, were all saying, this is really pre-Christian pagan stuff, and it's just been given a light Christian gloss, but we can remove that, Well, I mean, probably there are fertility rituals and kings wedded to land, and there's the idea of the dying king, and the rising king certainly speaks about winter and spring. But then winter and spring speak about that for a reason, because that's so I began to realize that these stories were taking the old things, bringing them to the light of Christ, and they were suddenly finding their fulfillment. Mm-hmm. And then I looked around at who's telling the story now, and all of that is absent. So that made me think, okay, like maybe my mother prepared me for this. Like maybe I'm the guy that, and I didn't see myself as giving a personal interpretation, or I'm restoring something. I'm taking all the, I'm painting back in what was deliberately painted out over the last couple of hundred years and saying, now look at it.
Well, and I'm glad you dedicated it to her.
Oh, yeah.
Because if you hadn't right now, I'd say you should have dedicated it.
She would too.
Yeah.
But talking about other people telling the stories, in your in one of your appendices, you mentioned Martin Shaw. Mm. And I actually kept this quote. I wanted to bring this up because you say Shaw is someone who, like me, seeks to break us out of the reductive materialism, the immanent frame that's been imprisoning us since the Enlightenment, and through the power of story and myth to reawaken our sense of wonder. And in this sense, he represents a continuation of the romantic resistance to the dead hand of reductive scientism. Yeah. And I just thought, when you're talking about, right, like the whole earth that is wounded by the wound of the Fisher King, right? We have told ourselves this story that the world is nothing more than material. It's just stuff.
This is, I mean, Descartes is at fault here, I think. Brilliant as Descartes is in many respects, but to take only two categories and say there's either res cogitans or res extensa, and all the cogitans, well, to be fair on Descartes, he thought there were three categories of conscious or thinking stuff, which was the human mind, angels, and God. But of course, then he evacuates matter entirely. Of all of that, it's just dead stuff, res extensa, real estate, really. But, he...
brute facts.
Yeah, the fact is, of course, that his followers thought, well, we can dispense with God and the angels, and now they're working on dispensing with even the mind, So, so that was a false view, it seemed to me. It was a false split, a false dichotomy, and this is not dead stuff out there. We need to recover a kind of mutually courteous. Yeah. And it's unsurprising, therefore, that, sensitive and spiritually gifted people like Martin Shaw are onto that. Mm-hmm. But, here's the Martin Shaw story. I was aware of Martin Shaw as a reteller, particularly of the story of Parzival, but I was also aware of him as somebody who's kind of inherited the mantle of Robert Bly, and he ran the kind of White Goddess Festival, and I saw him as essentially a neo-pagan. Now, at this point, I was thinking, I've probably got more in common with the neo-pagans than I have with the mere materialists, but paganism needs to hear the gospel. And I was anxious that the only people who were not reducing the Arthurian to kind of fisticuffs were the neo-pagans. And I was basically trying to write a book that said, guys, actually when the pagan story, the whole point about the telling of the medieval tellings was to bring that stuff to Christ and then realize, oh, Christ makes sense of this. So at the time I wrote this, I was thinking, and I started reading bits of it on my YouTube. I literally thought, boy, am I going to be in trouble with Martin Shaw? But I was hoping, as it were, to write it so sympathetically that I might begin, as a work of apology, I might begin to convert the Martin Shaws of this world. So lo and behold, I get an email. This is way before, I even had the published. I get an email from Martin Shaw, and I thought, okay, this is it. I sort of put on the pads now. And he says, Malcolm, I love this. Keep going. And I particularly love the way you're doing the storytelling. Now, I think he's one of the great storytellers of our age. And that was my problem. I thought, I know how to write a sonnet, but do I know how to tell a story? So I was very encouraged. And at the end of his email, I said, come and see me. And it so happened he lives right down in Devon, this kind of remote cottage, as you can imagine, on the edge of Dartmoor. And he leads these men's retreats out, and they all go out and sort of, live in tents and bivouacs and, stand out and look at the stars, go through kind of liminal space rituals, And so he said, come and see me. And I was supposed to be actually leading a retreat. It was right at the beginning of Lent. And the retreat I was leading was for mainly retired priests. And there was a massive storm blew up from the southwest. And just as I was starting this thing, the power went down and all the fridges and everything went off, and they had to cancel the retreat because, food wouldn't be safe. And I had arranged at the end of the retreat, a couple of days later, to go and see Martin. So I called him up and said, actually, I could come now if you happen to be free. He said, please do. So I thought, what's going to happen here? And I bought this sort of propitiatory bottle of Oban 14-year-old malt, kind of hold between. And it was extraordinary because I showed up and, it was a beautiful, low-built cottage with a thatched roof in a little coombe, as they call them in Devon, with the River Dart. It's actually, Ted Hughes used to live in that cottage at one point, the poet, where he used to go fishing. So, and it was like kind of going to see Bayonne because I kind of knocked on the door and there was no light, the candles. And this big bearded man came in and sort of looked me over and he beckoned me in. And of course, what I didn't know was that extraordinary things had been happening in his life. And actually the way I was telling the story kind of keyed into that. So one of the key figures I make much more of it even than Mallory does, is on the Grail Knights encounter the White Hart. And then the White Hart is accompanied by 4 lions, and it goes into a chapel. And then when they get in, the 4 lions have become the 4 living creatures, and they see Christ behind. So for a moment. Anyway, Martin sat me down and he said, I've been having a series of dreams in which a great stag, which kind of comes into my cottage and trashes it. And he said, it keeps happening again and again. And he said, I kind of know it's Christ. It's a bit awkward. Because he lives, he's got this big Substack following of kind of neo-pagans, but I thought, well, here we are. It's the beginning of Lent, and I read him, I thought, well, if God is moving in his life and calling him, to Christianity, then apart from his own salvation, there's a reason, which is to do with the church needs him as well as he needs the church. And I thought, God, what church is going to be big enough to hold this guy? So anyway, I wanted to talk to him about Lewis and Tolkien, and particularly Tolkien's idea of in Christ myth becomes history. But I started by reading him Lewis's poem, A Cliché Comes Out of Its Cage. The cliché in question being the world's gone back to paganism. And some bishop said to Lewis, harumphing, the world's gone back to paganism, expecting Lewis to agree. And Lewis went if only. Basically, Lewis was saying the gospel spread first among, it's actually a lot easier to talk about the death and resurrection of Christ to a pagan than it is to a mere materialist. So I read him this poem in which Lewis imagines modern England as pagan, first under a Roman mode and then under a Norse mode. And he was amazed. He didn't know Lewis had written this poem. And then I told him, the story of Addison's Walk. But I wouldn't say, I wasn't even so far as being a midwife. I was more just a gentle urger on. God was already doing extraordinary. So I said to him, it's the beginning of Lent. You should, return to Scripture, you should pray, and if you still think at the end of 40 days this really is God in Christ calling you, then you should get baptized. It's what the early church did. That's what Lent is for. You know, and here we are, the beginning of Lent. And in fact, he did get baptized, and but interestingly, he was received into the Orthodox Church, which is kind of, I now realize, kind of where he belongs in a way. But so I was very fortunate to be alongside him at that point. But in terms of this project, I couldn't have had a more encouraging development, because God was already doing in his life what I hoped this book might help to happen in the lives of lots of other, if you like, people who've despaired of the materialism but can't go back to Christianity yet for whatever reason, you know, baggage. But this might present the gospel in a way that's married to these great stories. So anyway, the really nice thing, this is quite entertaining, is so I didn't. So Pete Peterson at Rabbit Room said, "Why don't you write?" I mean, I'd acknowledged Martin in the acknowledgements of this and in the appendix. So he said, "Why don't you write to him and see if he'll do the, like, we had the foreword for this one from Susanna Clarke, which I was thrilled by." So he's done the foreword.
Oh, nice.
To the coming of Arthur, which he's done in his inimitable style. It's very different from. And he tells me things. So he recalls this meeting that I've spoken to you about. He says a few years. So he says. Referring to me, says, "A few years ago, the man turned up at my cottage with a bottle of whiskey and a tattered bundle of pages. Through the delicious fug of pipe smoke and rumpling of tweed, I recognized the kindred spirit. He also brought a storm with him so raucous we had to exist by candlelight, as all the wires and lights in my cottage immediately shorted. He has this effect. Since then, to me and my friends, he has been known as Storm Crow." Malcolm is a true Christian in all the deep mystery of that word, you know. Well, I went to his cottage thinking it would be a stumbling block and offense to him that I was a Christian. Yeah. But, you know, so,
well,
anyway, that was exciting.
He had been prepared by his dreams for your coming.
Well, and is the thing that is common between neo-paganism and Christianity the belief that there is meaning in the world?
In the world itself, and that, and that things are, and also the sense that we are alienated, that we've lost a relationship, and we need to find a way back into it. Now, they think they can do it by making up rituals which they think are ancient but aren't, and, you know, I mean, Druidism in particular was really dreamt up by romantics in the late 18th and early 19th century. I mean, you know, but print the legend, you know, but I understand the impulse to do that. And I think it's a healthier impulse than just trying to digitize everything, you know. So, yeah.
Well, I mean, we could sit here, I think, for hours and talk, and thankfully you're here for a couple of days.
Yeah.
But I think at this juncture...
Can I ask one more question? Sorry.
Yeah.
So we, in our fifth grade curriculum, we our students read medieval lit. So we're reading The Door in the Wall and Robin Hood, and we're using Roger Lancelot Green's
Green's retelling of Arthur is the best, I think, of those.
That's what I was going to ask, is what would be your favorite retelling?
No, because the thing about Malory, I mean, there was a famous thing in the 1930s. They found another manuscript in Winchester, and there was a completely new edition of Malory. I mean, I used the old one because I wanted the one that the other poets had used. But what they discovered really was that now when you buy it, it's not called the Mort d'Arthur, it's called the Works of Thomas Malory.
Oh.
Because what he was really doing was translating from a whole series of different French and Latin sources. And he seems to have been aware of the distinction between them, and some of them repeated the story, but in a different way with slightly different names, or he's got 3 different versions of what is effectively the Ship of Solomon. But what seems to have happened is that all these manuscripts arrived with Thomas Caxton, and he just picked the title of one of them, which was the Mort d'Arthur, and then he printed them all without essentially editing. So there's a ton of stuff in there. It's it's like a quarry you can take material out of, but it's very difficult.
It's very difficult
for the modern reader to follow the narrative thread.
That's what is
Thomas
beautiful
Malory.
about this is I feel like, and I've been so excited about this because I feel like we could put this in our high school curriculum after reading King Arthur in the grammar school, that this is accessible. Whereas Le Morte d'Arthur.
Yeah, and Green, I think, has done a great job in kind of pioneering a path and not losing the sacral. And, there's a lovely little kind of Easter egg, as they call it, in Lancelin Green, because he was a friend of Lewis's and a disciple of Lewis's. And when he talks about Merlin, as it were, passing into the earth, he lists all the possible places that he might be. And he just says, or perhaps he's lying under Bragdon Wood. And of course, Bragdon Wood is where he's found in that hideous strength. I mean, it's completely.
Oh, I didn't. I never knew that. I wonder if our teachers.
So if you've read that hideous strength, you're really excited. But if you've read Roger Lancelin Green and you can still remember, oh my goodness, Bragdon Wood, it's going to be Merlin,
I had no idea.
So Green has been very important to me. Obviously, I've used the medieval sources as well, and I put in things that aren't in Green, but as a way of finding through. I'm talking about your 5th graders and your 6th graders and things. I mean, there's a little issue about the order in which you do things here. So, which is kind of parallel with the Narnia things in some ways. If you take the whole Narniad, in a sense, although he didn't know he was going to write the other ones, perhaps, following Aristotle, you could say Lewis begins in medias res. He tells you the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, which is, of course, the heart and centre of it, because it's the redemption story.
That's right.
It's the atonement and redemption. But eventually, he decides to give you a creation story, and he does the magician's nephew, and he does a. So I love the little debates about which order to read in it. Now, I'm of the school of thought that says you need to know who Aslan is and what he's done for Edmund and for everyone in Narnia. And when you know that, then the account of his creation and his gift of freedom to the animals is all the more poignant. Mm-hmm. And you've also fallen in love with Narnia during The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and you've seen it redeemed. So you want to know about its creation. So that's the way it works. But equally, you can decide, I want to begin at the beginning and go to the end. Now, in this case, I too have begun in medias res.
Right.
I've begun with the Grail because I think the Grail is the heart of the matter. And in a sense, I think it's in light of the Grail that you see the importance of everything else. Why should we care about Camelot in the first place, etc.? So then this book, as it were, is followed by 2 prequels. So the next one is The Coming of Arthur. And then the one after that will be The Days of the Round Table.
Okay.
And
that'll be all the quests.
That's all the quests. That gets up to where we are here.
Right.
And then the final one will be The Passing of Arthur. Now, my hope is, particularly for people who are familiar with this material, that they'll come with me to the Grail Castle and see the redemption of the wasteland and the coming of the Grail Knight, so that when I tell them in The Coming of Arthur the story of the Dolorous Stroke as it originally happened, they'll kind of, I mean, it's like when I remember when I was training for the priesthood, we had to read these really. It was in the last gasp of the 80s, and this dreadful demythologizing literary, so-called historical criticism of the Gospels, and there was. And then there's the lofty tone these people took. So I was reading a commentary on Luke, and the guy says about the Transfiguration, he says, this is clearly a misplaced resurrection narrative. As though St. Luke had kind of made a minor error with the copying and pasting, But anyway, nevertheless, there was real insight. I thought, oh my goodness, it is a resurrection narrative in some sense. But is it not misplaced? Like, they see him on the Mount of Transfiguration and, the veil is lifted, if you like, because they're about to go down into the kind of fog and darkness and violence of Jerusalem. Yeah. And they're going to see the one whom they've seen resplendent on the mountain, richly humiliated and crucified like a slave. And everybody will try to tell them that's all he ever was. Like, this is just a disgusting, shameful, blasphemous person. And now we've demonstrated it. So they need to know what they saw. It's not misplaced at all. He went to the cross for the joy that was set before him. So in a sense, I'm giving you the Mount of the Transfiguration here.
Yes.
Before we get into both the good and the bad of the rest of the story.
So Lancelot and and Guinevere will be.
Oh, yeah. I mean, obviously,
they will be the end.
Lancelot and Guinevere. I mean, what you get here, I mean, this is the tragic. I don't want too many plot spoilers, but there's a moment of real repentance for Lancelot here. And a lot of people have written to me and, particularly men said that's really,
But
now, unfortunately,
the kingdom
in
still
the long
falls.
story, there is a kind of backsliding, and then that is ruthlessly exploited by Mordred. So yes, the kingdom falls. But in the coming of Arthur, this is the whole point. This is not only Christian wisdom, but classical wisdom. It's not a question of being on the winning side. It's a question of being on the right side.
That's right.
And the real question to Arthur is, are you willing to do this in the knowledge that in the times and tides of history it will fail? But it won't be forgotten.
Right.
And the flame will kindle another. So when he's handed, and this is in Malory, when he's given Excalibur, the blade is written on two sides. And on one side it says, take me up. And on the other side it says, cast me away. And in my version, which is coming out, the Nimue, the Lady of the Lake, says, are you willing to do all of this and expend yourself to build this thing up and then see everything you've made unmade? Mm-hmm. Because that's what this involves.
Right.
And when somebody knows that and has already, in a sense, made that choice, and he will be wounded in the battle and he will cast the sword back into the lake, that transforms everything he does. In a sense, he's already been prepared for the defeat. He's got his dying over with. I mean, that's meant to be the point of baptism. Is that I love the thing. That's a brilliant thing that Paul says. I think it's Corinthians where he says, you love to say this to one of your own congregations sometimes. He says, but you have died, and your life is hidden with Christ in God. Like, it's already done. You don't have to worry about death when it comes. You've already done it. If you're baptized into Christ, you're baptized into his death. So in a sense, Arthur has to see that and take that on. So he does all the loving and building of Camelot in the light of a defeat he already knows about.
Right.
So then you can't dismay him. You can't say, this is all going to come to nothing. It's not bloody worth it. Why don't you just give yourself a break? He says, I know it's not going to come to anything, but I'm still going to do it.
I'm still going to do it because it's the right thing to do.
Yeah.
So the second book is The Coming of Arthur. And when are we going to get that?
That's coming out this November. So
November. Okay.
And I'm going to be
Christmas
I'm going to be
time.
doing various things. I'm coming back to the States in October. And towards the end of October, it's the 23rd week, I'm doing a conference in Boston called Lifting the Veil. From Boston to Camelot, and books are going to be there, I'm having to turn the whole of my attention to this now. This is the last,
of course,
work I'm doing. So I'm not going to travel anymore as a professor, if you like, and setting out the grounds and theory that I've tried to set out for why the imagination is a truth-bearing faculty and why we need to recover the great stories. I mean, there are lots of people doing that in America as well here. But I'm having a last hurrah of that. So I'm going to open this conference with an account of why we need imaginative works and why we can trust a baptized imagination. But then the second half of the conference is just going to be about the works I've done and why what this is about. So yeah, that's one, but that'll be in, golly, I don't remember my own dates, but it's called Lifting the Veil, easy enough to find.
This is very difficult to find, the Galahad and the Grail.
Well, it's sort of sold out more or less twice. Yeah.
And now we can't get more until September.
Can you not?
No.
Oh,
because
golly, that's
we were going to.
Because they did a second printing that was like twice as big as the first one.
And they would never send. I was trying to get 500 the first time, and they would only give me 2. And then I tried to get 500 again, and they would only give me 2. And then we begged and got 50 more.
Oh, that's great. Well, no, there's definitely a bigger one coming in, as it were, which they hope sort of before Christmas.
But are you shocked at how quickly they're selling out?
Yeah, no. Well, I mean, I remember.
Or did you just know this?
No, I didn't know. I was going. I mean, this is exactly like Arthur. Mm-hmm. I was going like, I'm going to do this. Yeah. Even if it goes nowhere, like I'm the person. Like I just told my mother, I'm going to tell this story, and also because this is a book I would have wanted, when I was, a young man.
Yes.
So, and I always love that conversation between Lewis and Tolkien about nobody's writing the books we want, we better write them ourselves,
Right.
But no, so yourself when you're making a pitch to a publisher, you have to supposed to have a so-called USP, unique selling point. So I said to Rabbit and also to Canterbury Press, I said, well, my USP, I suppose, is nobody's done this for about 150 years. But then I was saying that might also be the unique sinking point. There might be a reason. I had a feeling either that it would sink without trace and I would just be known as Guite's folly. It would be like some, rambling, decrepit aristocrat who's built a ruin in his garden, that would be it. Or it would do the other.
Be this.
This would be a cultural moment. And I tell you what gave me hope is Martin Shaw. Like he was ready for this. God would have done things when Martin Shaw God is doing amazing things in and through him as well. I mean, his new Literature of the Wild book, but I thought maybe this is a moment. Maybe people know they need this stuff and they haven't. I was very pleased when the Times of London, they gave it a very good review, but they said, this is the opposite of AI slop.
Well,
and I thought
that's high praise.
That's high praise. No, they said it's a miracle.
Is,
and then the thing you want all reviewers to say, like the Times said, buy this book immediately.
Oh, very nice. Well,
So-
we say the same thing.
Yeah.
Except we can't get it. Buy it immediately, but there's a very limited stock.
Because there's always delays getting it from Rabbit Room. The best place to buy is Rabbit Room.
That's where we buy
Yeah.
it.
No, but generally to anyone, listening to this podcast, just go on Rabbit Room's site and get it direct from them.
Oh, well, yes. But I'm trying to buy it as a distributor.
Yeah. I think it is going into actual bookstores, which is great. I think like
well,
Barnes
that's what
and
I'm
Noble
trying
last
to do.
spring.
Is
I hope
it's in my bookstore.
Excellent.
Memoria College has a
you got a bookstore. That's right. Oh, it's very good. Yeah.
Yes, and this is part of it. And I just can't get enough of them. So I'm glad they're doing another big
They are.
one.
No, they're doing a much bigger printing. Yeah, because I think they think that people are going to realize this will make a really nice gift. Anyway, well, I'm glad that they gave you the 50 extra.
They did. Yes, we had to beg.
Yeah.
This is for us the first time I think that we have Martin short lists for the Parnassus Prize, and we all read. We pass the books around and read them. And this is the first time I think that we've all gotten 50 pages in and said, this is the book. Hopefully he doesn't mess it up by the end.
Yeah. Well, there's that, and then there's the next one. Well, you have to see. I'm going to give you when you receive the award. I'm going to give you. I'm going to talk a little bit about tradition and mentoring and handing on a torch.
Good.
But then I'm going to read you from this new one.
That's
moments
great.
of mentoring.
Yes.
great.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for joining us today on Classical Etc. by Memoria Press. If you like what you heard, please like, subscribe, or share this episode or comment. We love to hear your questions and your comments. If you want to learn more about Memoria Press, please go to memoriapress.com. This has been Classical Etc. We're so glad you joined us, and we'll see you next time.